What do you do when it feels like no matter what, employees just aren't listening? How do you motivate them in times of instability and change? How do you tailor messages to different employee groups? Hello, this is Danielle L. Scott, Managing Editor for the Graziadillo Business Report. Today is September 17th, 2009, and here with us is Terry McKenzie, Senior Director of Employee Communications and Communities at Sun Microsystems. Terry is responsible for overall communication strategy and creating programs to engage employees and support Sun's evolving corporate culture. Terry, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Totally my pleasure.
So tell us about your current job situation. What have you been getting into besides Sun?
Well, my current job situation is that we are in the midst of an acquisition. That is, we're being acquired. So Oracle, that little $4 billion company up there on Redwood Shores, is buying Sun Microsystems. We've already been approved by the Department of Justice, and now we're waiting for approval from the European Union. So talk about times of change and how do you keep people productive. It's huge for us right now. It's incredibly unstable because of that, and people don't know if they have a future to look forward to or if they should be out looking for another job.
So what does it mean to be in charge of overall communication strategy?
For my job, it's internal communication.
Okay.
That's what I'm in charge of. I don't get involved with external. What it means for me is that we have a charter to help employees be not only informed about what's going on at the company, but we want them to be enthusiastic, even though we're going through all these changes. And we want them to give their all. We want them to participate. So that's really what we're looking for, and that's what our job is. So I look at about maybe 50% of my job is making sure employees at Sun Microsystems know what's going on. But the other half of my job is really much more employee engagement, making sure employees have an opportunity to participate, provide their ideas, provide their excitement, and care about what's happening at the company.
Do you consider yourself having several different audiences, for example, different levels of employees?
I do consider that I have different audiences, but not so much by level of employee. Sun is made up of a number of divisions. Now, for example, about 30% of our employees are engineers. So I do look at engineers as a different audience than I look at the sales force or I look at the services group. So I think about it in that way. I divide it up, but I also, within that then, there are executives, of course, there are managers, there are all employees. So that's pretty much how we divide up the pie. Oh, excuse me, there's also the whole global aspect because we are a worldwide company.
Right. So you talked about the acquisition and some workforce reductions.
Yes.
What are you doing to keep employee morale up?
Well, I'm going to have to be honest with you. Since the acquisition was announced, it's become very different for us. Prior to the acquisition, a lot of my work really had to do with talking about Sun Microsystems and why you work for Sun and why you're here and why you want to be part of a great innovation company, and really the things about our culture that were so special. And I played off the underdog angle a lot, because we are a medium-sized company in a world of giants. We had, at one point, 40,000 employees. You compare that to some of these companies like Cisco or IBM, they have hundreds of thousands of employees. It's crazy how many employees. HP has 300,000. So I wanted to build a lot of pride in the company itself. And a big part of that was the relationship that we wanted people to have with each other and with the executives. So a lot of our work really went to getting executives to go out and meet with employees. For example, one of the things that we did was I got executives to do what we call 3C meetings. Tell an executive, while you're out traveling on business, go to an office, invite 10 people to just sit down with you for an hour and tell them they have to be prepared to answer 3 questions. What's of concern to them? So what are their concerns? What are their compliments where they think the company's doing well? And what are they hearing from customers? And urging the executive doesn't have to go in there and do a speech. He's there to listen. And that was a way for people to feel valued and get their ideas out and be recognized, and also had a chance to tell somebody who could make a difference in it what was going on in the field, what was happening in the office, unveiling some roadblocks that could be happening. So I think that one of the things that we did, when I look back, one of the most important things we did to keep employee morale up was it wasn't so much about what we told people, it was about developing great listening skills on the part of our executives and our managers so that they could involve employees in their future.
So, one of the questions that I had for you was about Sun's evolving corporate culture.
Yes.
I guess that has to do with the acquisition. Is that what you meant by evolving?
Yes, it's evolving into an Oracle culture. Funny about that. I was involved when we acquired Storage Tech a few years ago, which was a big company out of Colorado. And I remember being so frustrated when all the people at Storage Tech would talk about their great culture and how much better it was than Sun's culture. And I'm like, well, you know what? Let's face it. We bought you. You didn't buy us. And so I really bear that in mind as we go through this Oracle acquisition. It's not a merger. It's not a merger of equals. We are being acquired. And one of the most important things we can do for employees is to make sure they're informed about Oracle. They understand the differences. I don't believe in whitewashing things. I don't believe in pretending that everything is great and that it's not going to be difficult. So I think it's fair to people to be honest with them and say, Larry Ellison is a very different executive than Jonathan Schwartz or Scott McNeely was, and it's going to be a different environment. They are an incredibly successful company, they run a very tight business, and they do very, very well. Whether or not this is going to be the right place for you is a decision you're going to have to make.
So how do you keep your messages consistent, considering there's so much change going on, or is that not a concern?
Oh, it's totally a concern. Here's what I learned. What I learned is that if the company itself doesn't know what they want to say, it doesn't matter what kind of magic the communicator does. You can't turn a bucket of mud into a nice clear broth. It doesn't happen. We've done extensive work with our marketing group, with our executive group, with our human resources group to really get them to think about what is it they want to say. So for example, a couple years ago when Jonathan came in as the CEO, he had a new business strategy he wanted to communicate. But if you asked Jonathan what it was, and you asked the marketing people what it was, and you asked the engineering audience what it was, and then you asked the vice presidents who didn't necessarily agree with that what it was, you got very different stories. So we pushed it down. I told Jonathan that he could communicate, but he had to use the following template. He had to use 2 whats and 3 hows. What 2 things is Sun Microsystem going to do? How are we going to do it? 3 methods that we were going to use to do it. That forced him to become crystal clear, and it also forced the discussion around the executive table to talk about, well, is that really what we mean, or is this what we mean? So it's not something you can force on people. I think there's a process you go through to make sure all your stakeholders really believe it and they understand it. And even if they don't think it's the right strategy, they understand how destructive it is to a company and to employees to be getting different messages. So that's kind of the process we went through. Now, one of the tools that we've relied on, we used a number of tools to do this. One of them was 5-Minute Fridays. And that was every Friday, Jonathan would get in front of a camera, not unlike this, and talk to employees for 5 minutes about what was happening in the business, where were the issues, what was happening that was good, where were some of the problems. It's kind of his thoughts. So you got the words straight from the CEO, no matter where you sat around the world. The other thing my group does is a monthly manager's kit. We provide managers, electronically of course, a meeting kit that they can use that has 10 slides maybe, and it talks about what's happening, what's going on, where the strategy is, what the big sales are, what the big issues are, and then we give them speaker notes and urge them not to send employees to the site to read it, because that ruins the whole purpose. The whole idea is to take that slide deck and talk about it in context of what your own business is, so that the salespeople understand what it is from a sales perspective versus the engineers who'd want to understand it from an engineering perspective. So we did have a number of formal tools that we used, as well as a different mentality about communication, which is listen more than you talk.
So would you say that's the main thing that managers don't get about communicating to their employees? It's really about listening?
I think managers are often afraid to communicate, especially when times are difficult. They're terrified of the hard questions that people are going to ask them. So there's hiding that goes on. We went through an outsourcing exercise a few years ago with our human resources group, and we knew that a lot of our folks in HR were going to lose their jobs. So what manager wants to get up in front of their employees and say, we're outsourcing this function. I don't know if you're going to have a job. So there was a lot of fear. And what we did was we did some virtual training sessions where I got up and I role-played the meeting, how I would handle it if I was doing the meeting. We stopped then and we had some experts come in and talk about outsourcing, what it was and what it meant, talk about what we could reveal at this point versus what we couldn't. And then I turned back to the audience and I said, now it's time for a questions from hell session. So you're all managers out there and you all manage groups of very smart, outspoken people. I want you to start to email me and ask me the hardest questions you think people ask. And so we just made them generate. I said, I want you to think of the most unpleasant person you have on your team. The person, whenever they raise their hand, you go, oh, and try to look the other way. I don't see them. What obnoxious question are they going to ask? And so they got out all these awful questions, and then together we answered them. And so we took away the fear factor. They now knew that they had an answer. Even if the answer was, I'm so sorry, if I understand your question, you're asking me whether or not you're going to have a job when this process is done. Is that the question you're asking? I just don't have the answer right now. All I can tell you at this point in time is that we've just put out the request for proposal. We're expecting to have responses back by this date. And as I know information, I will tell you. So we wanted to make sure that they didn't overpromise, managers didn't overpromise what they could tell, but that they treated people like insiders to whatever extent they could in sharing what they had and not being embarrassed to say, I don't know.
So honesty and preparation.
Absolutely. I really think when you're going through a change and when you're in a troubled environment, the one thing you cannot afford to lose is the trust of your employees. And companies who go out there and they put the blue suede shoes and the mirror and this, the smoke in the mirrors, everything's out there, isn't this fabulous? I think they do themselves a real disservice because employees are smart. And employees they'll be out there on those Yahoo chat rooms checking out to see what people are really saying. There are no secrets, so you really need to develop a way to have honesty with your employees.
Well, Terry, that was my last question.
Great.
Thank you so much. You've been a great help.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
This is Danielle Scott for the Grasdia Business Report.